Did you think computing will eat everything in some certain sense, or almost like disappear because it's part of everything?
It's so funny you say this. So I want to say it's going to metastasize, but there's kind of two ways that fields destroy themselves. One is they become super narrow, and I think we can think of fields that might be that way. They become pure. And we have that instinct. We have that impulse. I'm sure you can think of several people who want computer science to be this pure thing. Yeah. The other way is you become everywhere and you become everything and nothing. And so everyone says, I'm going to teach Fortran for engineers or whatever. I'm going to do this. And then you lose the thing that makes it worth studying in and of itself. The thing about computing, and this is not unique to computing, though at this point in time it is distinctive about computing, where we happen to be in 2020, is we are both a thriving major. In fact, the thriving major, almost every place. And we're a service unit because people need to know the things we need to know. And our job, much as the mathematician's job is to help, this person over here to think like a mathematician, much the way the point of you taking chemistry as a freshman is not to learn chemistry. It's to learn to think like a scientist, right? Yeah. Our job is to help them to think like a computationalist. And we have to take both of those things very seriously. And I'm not sure that as a field, we have historically certainly taken the second thing, that our job is to help them to think a certain way. People who aren't going to be our major, I don't think we've taken that very seriously at all.
I don't know if you know who Dan Carlin is. He has this podcast called Hardcore History.
Yes.
I've just did an amazing 4-hour conversation with him, mostly about Hitler. But I bring him up because he talks about this idea that it's possible that history as a field will become, like currently, most people study history a little bit. We kind of are aware of it. We have a conversation about it, different parts of it. I mean, there's a lot of criticism to say that some parts of history are being ignored, blah, 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 so on. But most people are able to have a curiosity and able to learn it. His thought is it's possible, given the way social media works, the current way we communicate, that history becomes a niche field where literally most people just ignore, because everything is happening so fast that the history starts losing its meaning, and then it starts being a thing that only, it's like the theoretical computer science part of computer science. It becomes a niche thing that only like the rare holders of the world wars and all the history, the founding of the United States, all those kinds of things, the civil wars. And it's a kind of profound thing to think about, how we can lose track, how we can lose these fields when they're best, like in the case of history, it's best for that to be a pervasive thing that everybody learns and thinks about and so on. And I would say computing is quite obviously similar to history, in the sense that it seems like it should be a part of everybody's life to some degree, and especially like as we move into the later parts of the 21st century. And it's not obvious that that's the way it'll go. It might be in the hands of the few still, like depending if it's machine learning, it's unclear that computing will win out. It's currently very successful, but it's not. I would say that's something. I mean, you're at the leadership level of this. You're defining the future, so it's in your hands.
No pressure.
But like, it feels like there's multiple ways this can go, and there's this kind of conversation of everybody should learn to code, right? The changing nature of jobs and so on. Do you have a sense of what your role in education of computing is here? Like, what's the hopeful path forward?
There's a lot there. I will say that, well, first off, it would be an absolute shame if no one studied history. On the other hand, as t approaches infinity, the amount of history is presumably also growing, at least linearly. And so it's you have to forget more and more of history. But history needs to always be there. I mean, I can imagine a world where, if you think of your brains as being outside of your head, that you can kind of learn the history you need to know when you need to know it. That seems fanciful. But it's a kind of way of, is there a sufficient statistic of history? No. And there's certainly, but there may be for the particular thing you have to care about. But, those who do not remember.
It's for our objective camera discussion, right?
Yeah. It's right. And we've already lost lots of history. And of course, you have your own history, that some of which will be, it's even lost to you, right? You don't even remember whatever it was you were doing 17 years ago.
All the ex-girlfriends.
Yeah. Never
Gone.
happened. Exactly. So, history is being lost anyway, but the big lessons of history shouldn't be. And I think, to take it to the question of computing and sort of education, the point is you have to get across those lessons. You have to get across the way of thinking. And you have to be able to go back and, you don't want to lose the data, even if, you don't necessarily have the information at your fingertips. With computing, I think it's somewhat different. Everyone doesn't have to learn how to code, but everyone needs to learn how to think in the way that you can be precise. And I mean precise in the sense of repeatable, not just, in the sense of, not resolution in the sense of get the right number of bits. In saying what it is you want the machine to do and being able to describe a problem in such a way that it is executable, which we are not. Human beings are not very good at that. In fact, I think we spend much of our time talking back and forth just to kind of vaguely understand what the other person means and hope we get it good enough that we can act accordingly. You can't do that with machines, at least not yet. And so, having to think that precisely about things is quite important. And that's somewhat different from coding. Coding is a crude means to an end. On the other hand, the idea of coding, what that means, that it's a programming language and it has these sort of things that you fiddle with and these ways that you express, that is an incredibly important point. In fact, I would argue that one of the big holes in machine learning right now and in AI is that we forget that we are basically doing software engineering. We forget that we are doing we're using programming, like we're using languages to express what we're doing. We get just so all caught up in the deep network, or we get all caught up in whatever, that we forget that, we're making decisions based upon a set of parameters that we made up. And if we did slightly different parameters, we'd have completely different outcomes. And so the lesson of computer science education, is to be able to think like that and to be aware of it when you're doing it. Basically, at the end of the day, it's a way of surfacing your assumptions. I mean, we call them parameters, or, we call them if-then statements or whatever, but you're forced to surface those assumptions. That's the key thing that you should get out of a computing education, that, and that the models, the languages, and the machines are equivalent. But it actually follows from that you have to be explicit about what it is you're trying to do, because the model you're building is something you will one day run. So you better get it right, or at least understand it and be able to express roughly what you want to express. So I think it is key that we figure out how to educate everyone to think that way, because at the end, it will not only make them better at whatever it is that they are doing, and I emphasize doing, it'll also make them better citizens. It'll help them to understand what others are doing to them so that they can react accordingly. Because you're not going to solve the problem of social media insofar as you think of social media as a problem by just making slightly better code, right? It only works if people react to it appropriately and know what's happening, and therefore take control over what they're doing. I mean, that's my take on it.